I wonder, I just want to make sure that this is on here.
Oh.
Well, hello everyone. Good.
Fall on our table, yeah.
Oh, great. Great to have you here. We've been having such great bio seminars here over these last 18 months or so, and especially these last several months. We've just had such a diversity of talks and such a diversity of focus areas. Again, some of you have been to a lot of these. We had a great eminent historian here talking about the history of sport and what he studies. We had an artist here a few weeks ago talking about the intersection of art and sport. We talked about some leadership stuff last week. We've had some of you have been presenters over the years. Chad's presented his work and others have. So such a great diversity of work. And that's part of what we're here for. We're here to build community around research on our campus, in our community, that's centered with athletics as a hub in it. So it's awesome to see undergraduate students, to see graduate students, to see faculty, staff, and leaders here all doing this work. So we're all in it together and we're all benefiting from it. Morning, Matt. So today, actually, good timing, Matt. Just walked in. I had the pleasure of, that was a few months ago or a couple months ago, sitting in a room with Dr. Raj here and Mac, and we're sitting just talking about a bunch of interesting ideas and talking. And we thought, God, it'd be great if you could come and just share some of the work you're doing, which is vast work with some of our group, and just hear about the research and hear about how you go about it and why you do it. And so thank you, Raj, for being here today. Maybe before we start, let's very quickly, if we could go around, just kind of say, just so we can have the lay of the room a little bit about who's here. Just, your name and why you're here. We know we've got a great contingent of kinesiology students. How about instead of you telling us what class you're in, tell us your hometown. How about that? Paul?
Sure, sorry, yep. So Paul Riemann, hometown is Monroe, New York, but been here for 26 years, and I'm with Raj Leo. I've been working, delivering the program for just over 4 years now.
I'm Maria Daynard and St. Paul, Minnesota.
I'm Grace. I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm Sydney Stenger. I'm from about 45 minutes south of the city. It's a small town, Williamsburg. I'm Lydia. I'm from Grossburg, Michigan. I'm Olivia. I'm from Appleton, Wisconsin. I'm Sydney. I'm from Naperville, Illinois.
Craig Hansen, Jefferson, Wisconsin.
Kevin Schultz, Waukesha.
Jacob Knaus, Prairie.
Abby Wanzak, Elm Grove, Wisconsin.
Jen McGee, Sycamore, Illinois.
Vicki Opitz, Middleton, Wisconsin.
Hodge Bulovich, Chicago, Illinois.
Adrian Disney, Love Park, Illinois.
Chicago, Southside.
Chris from Milwaukee.
Pete Miller from South Bend, Indiana. So it's good.
And I'm Raj. I'm from Milwaukee.
Great.
Berlin.
Thank you, Raj.
Thanks, we appreciate it. Yeah, so we'll I'll try to get through and try to leave 15 minutes or so at the end for questions. This will be pretty stimulating, and we can always get together again to continue the conversation. So the idea behind this Human 3.0 is the science of mastery is now very well understood. It's really a function of time invested and frankly how much feedback you can tolerate. And the science of success is also very well understood. It's how fast you can iterate and how well you can stay in a flow state. So those two aspects of being successful in anything you can think of are pretty well established now. And we've gone a step beyond that to say, okay, what are the barriers to being able to iterate faster, to be really masterful of your craft, but also really successful in manifesting that craft in the field, whatever your field is. So the idea of a Human 3.0 is that I will contend that most people are motivated in the wrong way. I'm being a little dramatic on purpose. That human 1.0 and 2.0 is driven by the dopamine system, the nucleus accumbens. I won't get too brain sciencey, but the reward center is primarily driven by the desire for external accomplishment or pleasure and validation. And that's human 1.0 and 2.0 is active, a passive and active acquisition of dopamine specifically in order to be motivated to do things. And I will argue that that is an inferior way to be motivated and blocks you from iterating faster at becoming masterful and becoming very successful at manifesting that in the field. So that's the idea behind Human 3.0 is how can I help you unlock your potential by moving faster and getting certain parts of your brain out of the way, okay? And where this came from is that I was one of these kids who did really well academically. I skipped a few years of school. I started med school here. That's why the UW. I'm not there now. I'm a physician at Advocate Aurora in Milwaukee. I live 4 blocks up, but I work in Milwaukee. Long story. It's a critical care type of practice in obstetrics as an anesthesiologist. But the story for me starts when I was 20 years old, starting med school. Everything was going great. I actually lettered in 3 sports. I was doing great academically. I thought I had the whole world in the palm of my hand. And life has a funny sense of humor. The transition from second year of med school to third year of med school back then, I'm 56 now, that was 35 years ago, is very dramatic. It goes from books, which I was great at, to life and people, which I was horrible at, it turned out. I had all kinds of issues came out, mental health issues. I had anxiety, anger, type A personality. I was narcissistic, I was sociopathic. It was a mess. I ended up taking a year off of med school to figure out whether I could even go on anymore, because I went from top of the class to basically bottom of the class. Luckily, my wife of 35 years showed up, and she's conveniently a therapist. So she saved me, number one. And number two, a dear friend of mine, who was a Division I golfer at Northwestern, was a big brother to me. He was a year ahead of me and really helped me to fall in love with self-help kinds of literature. So those 2 angels saved me in the middle of medical school. I stabilized, and then I was like, what just happened to me? What's wrong with me? What do I need to fix? And so this has been a lifelong journey of trying to understand human dynamics and mental health issues and performance issues. I also got a clinical, I got an NIH scientist training grant and became a clinical researcher. So for a decade, I designed and ran clinical trials at the medical college. So the combination of the medical background, the clinical science background, and this passion for understanding what just happened to me is where this sort of came about. Then over the last 10 years, including people like Paul Raymond, we've been aggregating a whole bunch of, we call them brain hacks, into a composite intervention, we call it, to see what happens when we teach a whole bunch of insights from social psychology to evolutionary biology to brain science and turn it into a composite intervention. What happens to people when we take these discoveries and put them into a kind of cohesive framework? And so what this is, sorry, that's in the way, but the idea behind this thing we call Leo is we are aggregators. So our notion is we want to bring the best ideas of science together and we're very agile in that, and we'll teach you how to be agile, which is to cycle really fast, to try things and see what's working and not working, and fail fast, as they say in Silicon Valley. We're copying Silicon Valley methodology, which is a formula for success in every field, and it's coming fast down the pathway. So we're very agile. We cycled, jumped probably 500 workshops over the last 4 years, from corporations to athletes to school systems to healthcare. And the idea is to make it more and more accessible, and then we've seen some incredible outcomes, which I'll show you. So it's very hopeful. Initially, it'll be distressing because I'm going to be challenging the way you think about one. But eventually, remember, it's very hopeful what I'm sharing with you. And the idea with this 5th A is airplane is that we're in the midst of a mental health crisis, unlike anything since the Great Depression. And I work in an inner city hospital in Milwaukee, are at the receiving end of that. We see all kinds of crazy things happening. And so it's really important for people to also learn this toolkit to stabilize psychologically, because this is a very traumatic time period we're going through. So it's important for you to learn these kinds of tools, stay stable psychologically, and then teach others to go from what we call lower brain to higher brain. Okay, so in the sports realm, and that wasn't my primary emphasis, but we've started to accumulate some really interesting outcomes. We worked with a Division I golf team about 7 years ago. And then a dear friend of mine who I'll show a little video from, he was a Badger hockey player and finished in '96, became a pro hockey player, ripped his knee out. Back then they didn't have ACL repairs, and so he was done. Became a professional hockey coach in Europe for about a quarter of a century. He started to help a few NHL players who had big turnarounds in their careers. He also worked with one Division I hockey coach, who was very successful. I've been working with a pro golfer for free because he's a real good young man, and he's been making dramatic improvements in his abilities. And then Greg, who you'll see this video from, took a team that was last place, basically in last October, I think it was, and they just missed the playoffs by 1 game. So the system seems to be working no matter where we go. So that's what I want to show you. So this is very interesting. I'm going to start with the outcomes, so you're kind of more excited about some of the little bit sciencey stuff. But if you look at the average performance of a golf team, so this is Duke, this is Arizona. You can almost look at this as almost like a brain scan, an EEG pattern, because each of these lines is a tournament, and a tournament has 3 rounds, 1, 2, 3. And you, in golf, as you probably know, you want to take your aggregate score. So the 4 best performers out of 5, 6, 7 golfers, you combine their score, and you want the score obviously to go down in golf. And you can see here, the typical pattern is for the scores to be jumping all over the place for one thing, and they go up, right? Because the competition becomes more intense, they make the course tougher because they're really mean. And you can see jumping all over the place. And then, am I okay on the camera? Okay. And then you can see before we worked with that team, spring 2015, very similar pattern. And that's 2 semesters before, 1 semester before, sorry, it's in the way, but it looks the same. So, and then after we worked with them, something very interesting happened. So they won 1 Big East championship in 25 years. And after we worked with them, they won 3. So this is what happened to them after we worked with them. 12 young men who learned this system and became very psychologically stable and able to iterate faster and adapt. Golf is a constant failure experience if you've played. And so it's very psychologically destabilizing, especially at, in the competitive realm. As you can see here, every single tournament, they got better and better. And look how stable their performance is, right? So this is like a brain signature showing that these young men really changed as human beings and were able to tolerate the challenge of a tournament, and went on to do very well. And one of those golfers now we're working with, and he's just on the cusp of getting onto one of the professional tours. He's doing really great. I have a video of him also. Questions about this, so I can give you a little chance to catch your breath. This makes sense? Okay. All right. So here's another interesting outcomes situation. So Greg then, as I said, Greg Poss took over this hockey team because they were floundering. And, in Europe, as you might know by now, if you're in last place, the risk is relegation. You get demoted down to the lower league, which is a disaster. So they brought him in, and you can see how poorly they were doing at the bottom of the league. And once he started working with them and teaching them these brain hacks, they went up here. And they just missed the playoffs by 1 game. And this is with players that just were completely demoralized, and the culture was terrible. This is an incredible, it's hard to overstate how incredible this change is. And I mentioned as well, NHL players and D1 hockey coaches they work with. So we're seeing that athletes and coaches are very responsive to shifting their mindset about how they approach their craft and how they approach the field. Let me just show you a little video from Greg. I didn't coach him on this. I said, tell me what your experience has been of learning this system, and soon I'll get into what that system is.
Hi, I'm Greg Poss, and I've been coaching professional hockey for 28 years. Throughout my career, I always strive to find ways to improve my coaching techniques and help my team win more games. However, I knew that in order to achieve sustainable success, it was crucial to increase both my team's and my own mental strength. Unfortunately, despite trying various team building activities, motivational techniques, and working with sports psychologists, I found it difficult to consistently increase our mental strength. In 2018, I was introduced to Dr. Niraj Nijhawan and his Leo program, which he had successfully implemented with the Marquette University golf team. After just 10 minutes of speaking with Dr. Raj, I knew that this program was the answer I'd been searching for. The Leo program offers a system and structure to train the mind similar to how we train our bodies and skills in order to optimize performance. Dr. Raj's approach is based on science and research, providing athletes with practical techniques for increasing their mental strength. Since then, I've become a mental performance coach utilizing the Leo program with athletes, coaches, and teams across a range of sports worldwide. The program not only helps participants to optimize their sports performance, but also improves the quality of their lives. Athletes use the same brain hacks from the Leo program to enhance their performance in school, relationships, business, and as community leaders. Recently, I had the opportunity to return to professional hockey coaching after taking a 3-year break to focus on teaching the Leo program. When I took over the team, we were in last place. However, by implementing the techniques I learned from Dr. Raj and the Leo program, we significantly increased our winning percentage, narrowly missing the playoffs by just one game. As a result, I signed a new 2-year contract, and I'm thrilled to continue the Leo journey with this team. I credit Dr. Raj and the Leo program for this opportunity and success. Thank you.
Sorry, it sounds a little sales pitchy, and I'm, to be honest, this is gonna sound really weird, but you don't know me, and so you shouldn't trust me, but my motivation for doing this, by the way, is I love seeing people just flourish. Like, I am, to be blunt, wealthy enough that I actually don't have to work, and I don't care about being famous or being recognized. For me, it's about beauty. It's about seeing people really take off. Greg is such a great person, so humble. He's been really transformed as a human being, and really doesn't, he's so humble, he wouldn't talk about that aspect as much. But sorry, I know that sounds a little bit sales pitchy, but it's from the heart. What's interesting is the Marquette athletes, their mental health also transformed. Again, being in a mental health crisis, you can see sleep problems improved, anxiety improved, self-satisfaction, stress from daily demands, everything improved. And the only reason everything improves is you're switching from what we call lower brain to higher brain. Similarly, we got a grant from the state of Wisconsin, a $250,000 grant, and started delivering this to high school students all the way down to 14 years of age. And look at these profound outcomes. And this 1-year follow-up was in the heart of the pandemic. So it was the worst time to do a 1-year follow-up analysis, but still pretty profound improvements, including suicide going 18% to 0. Sleep problems were the only thing that didn't improve, but there's a lot of biological explanations for that. And then finally, psychological safety is a very important construct, because coaches, athletes, I mean, the science of the X's and O's and skill development, coaches are geniuses of that. But the challenge is also having athletes that are totally malleable and have a growth mindset. How many of you heard of the concept of the growth mindset, by the way? Show of hands. Yeah, a lot of you. Carol Dweck's work out of Berkeley. So the idea is, how responsive are you to new ideas and cycling and trying things and learning and being honest about what's working and not working. And so psychological safety is a construct that's been well validated, where we can actually measure the malleability or growth mindset of a human being, adults, students, doesn't matter. And so I think it's really important for us to measure how malleable we are and how we're shifting the needle on that, in order to then be more responsive to the iteration that I said is key to the science of mastery and the science of success. As you can see here, this is in one particular adult cohort, like a 50% improvement. And we ask all kinds of questions about how vulnerable can you be? Psychological safety really is, can you say, I don't know? Can you say, I made a mistake? Can you say, can you help me with this insight, or it's a knowledge, or it's understanding, or it's a skill, or it's having a difficult conversation in a team event, team sport, where you need to communicate in a way that's vulnerable but not triggering of the other person. These are all measured by the construct of psychological safety, and we use about 20 different questions that have been validated. So this is a key predictor, I would argue to you, of growth mindset, malleability, responsiveness to coaching. Okay, so let's talk about, I referred a little bit to the science of mastery, excellence, genius. I kind of look at those as the same, and the science of success. Okay, the science of genius. How many did I ask you already? 10,000 hour idea. Did I ask you that already? 10? How many are familiar with the 10,000 hour idea? Show of hands. Okay, pretty decent number. So that was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, but the work was done by the scientist Anders Ericsson over a 30-year period. Unfortunately, he just died recently. And he's one of my heroes. He's the sort of the godfather of the science of genius and mastery and excellence. So he discovered this 10,000 hour idea, that 10,000 hour idea, which is the number of hours you put in determine how excellent or masterful you will be. And that's understandable because it's all about neuroplasticity. So it turns out that talent and even intelligence are not the predictors of being great in anything. That is gone now. It is actually the time you put in, how much feedback you can tolerate are the keys. Okay, in fact, Anders Ericsson talks about the 10,000 hours idea, and in his book Peak, he's like, no, that wasn't the main concept. It wasn't the hour. Hours are important, but there was something else that was even more important than the hours. Anybody remember what that concept was that he discussed? Deliberate practice, which is practice in a way that you're working with an expert and they're constantly giving you feedback about how you're doing well and not doing well, right? So it's the way you structure practice and how responsive you are to that is the key, combined with the hours, in determining how genius or masterful or excellent you are. Okay, and so it's total commitment and total feedback tolerance are the key to being a master of almost anything you choose to be excellent at. Okay. And it's just it's neural networks. We know how neural networks work. Everything is a neural network. Every skill, every knowledge, every understanding, every quality of existence, every feeling is a neural network. And so you can expand and shrink basically any neural network that you want to focus on. You got to put the time in and you got to tolerate the feedback. Okay. And you can just, for fun, you can Google neuroplasticity. And I think everybody here knows the concept of neuroplasticity. But it's good to study it to inspire you to know you have infinite potential to become great at one or two or three things if you choose to put the time in. And so a variety of studies have proven that we have an incredible ability to sculpt our brain. It's truly unlimited. Okay.
If I can just take a second. And the big part of the feedback, a big part of that is emotion. And emotion is what drives neuroplasticity. It's BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. And so the emotions that are present when there's feedback is really what drives actually neuroplasticity taking place.
Yeah, it's a good point. And that's here, the keys to growing the brain. It turns out we know them now. It's time and feedback tolerance. And Paul knows this stuff. But if I say to you, hey, can I give you some feedback? What's the feeling that you get when I say that to you? Right? It's like, dum, 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 dum. Stomach is dropping, and you're like, how dare you talk to me like that? You don't know what I'm going through. I've been working really hard. And your lower brain is starting to self-protect and say, whoa, this feedback is really painful. I feel diminished. Show of hands, by the way, is self-esteem important? Show of hands, self-esteem, yes. Anybody say it's not important? I will argue to you that self-esteem is a waste of time. Self-esteem is the key barrier to being really great at anything. You do not have to feel good about yourself to feel really good. It's a brain trick that we'll talk to you about a little bit as time allows. That's one of the brain hacks that we teach, is that it's a Neanderthal hunter-gatherer dynamic dopamine system that causes you to crave validation and higher status. But if you can tolerate diminishment, by taking on feedback, you're unstoppable in become how great you can be and how well you can perform. It's like Paul said very well, emotions are critical, but we can harness positive emotions and negative emotions, hence the book title of Anders Ericsson's book, Peak, which is we are peak learning machines, which is when emotions are high, we actually increase our neuroplasticity by the release of BDNF. And so we can actually harness positive and negative emotions to drive it to increasing neural networks that matter to us. Okay? Questions so far? So that was the science of excellence slash mastery slash genius. But that's not the whole equation of being really performing well and being great at anything. Sports, music, business, it doesn't matter what, being a parent, being a significant other. But when it comes to the science of genius, there are two systems, the dopamine systems of the nucleus accumbens, of the hunter-gatherer brain, it's the limbic system. A lot of people now are aware of dopamine, I know that, but they haven't caught up to the implications of that system and how it's blocking you. And so this system explains a lot in life, is that this is a dopamine curve. And so your orbital prefrontal cortex, which is the storytelling machinery of your brain, collaborates with the dopamine system to reward you for doing certain things. So what stories you tell, hence the title of the program is also Change Your Story, Change Your Life. The stories that you tell will determine what you're motivated by and what you're stressed out by. So if it's working out, you get a little dopamine spike, but if it doesn't work out, you get a dopamine drop, right? Which is why we're having a mental health crisis, because there's a panic about the future and whether people can stay up with the future and are they going to be reduced in status and reduced in opportunity. That's a big explanation for why, especially as Americans, we are struggling psychologically. But that system is really critical to understand, and you can shut it off when you understand it and know how to feel that it's coming on, step outside of it, let it cool down. That allows you to get away from the FOMO brain, fear of missing out, which is a dopamine system, and the self-esteem brain, which is what I asked you about self-esteem, which is also this desire for higher status. These systems are old and they're there. When I ask you the craving, which is the dopamine system, and the fear and anxiety and stress, why are these systems there even? They've been around for about 2.5 million years. Any thoughts on why they're there? If they're causing all this struggle and problem, what's their point?
Survival.
Survival is a good answer. There's even a little bit better answer, but almost everybody says survival. Well, here's an interesting point. In the last couple million years, the average life expectancy was 27. So if survival was the imperative of the system, it weren't doing a very good job, right? It failed at that job. So not survival, but survival of what? That it did a really good job with. Survival of the genes. So not survival of the body, because it didn't do a good job, because our average life expectancy was terrible. Now, another part of the brain showed up, what we call the higher brain, and that did a good job with survival of the body. So our life expectancy started to take off because our creativity started to take off. The survival of the genes is the prime directive of the limbic system. And so this system gets us to be really, because we were going to die at a young age, its imperative is to get the genes to the next generation before the body goes away. And so it's obsessed with social rank and opportunity. And that's why we are designed to be selfish in order to optimize our mating ability. Social rank, tribal acceptance, these things allow us to mate, allows the genes to get to the next generation. The genes say, bye, thank you, thanks for helping, carrying us along, body, but we know you're gonna be gone soon, we will live on. And so this system now is imploding on us because it's constantly being stimulated. It's a what-if system. It's constantly obsessed with loss. Loss, lots of opportunity, loss of, oh, they're having such a great life on social media, right? So I'm wasting time, loss of status. Oh, they look so good, they're so successful, I'm a loser. Loss. This is why dopamine system is out of control right now in the negative, right? But it also is a major impediment to letting go of FOMO to commit the time to be great and letting go of self-esteem in order to tolerate feedback to become great. Okay, so we need to understand that system, and now you already have an understanding. Self-esteem, is that important? I will argue, no. As time allows, we can get deeper into that, because I'm sure that concept is very triggering for you, as it always is for audiences. Questions? Please.
Yeah, do you see any, like, difference in the, so you're saying we're really low in kind of like a dopamine valley right now?
Yeah,
But we also are so stimulated by like our phones and social media and stuff, and we're constantly increasing like our dopamine intake with all the media that we're taking in. Do you see that creating a problem in like that we're getting really high highs and really low lows?
it's a really good point. I think, but what happens is because the loss avoidance detector is more powerful, because that's its prime motivation. There's Nobel Prize winning studies to show that loss avoidance is our prime motivator, not gain. What we're seeing when we're getting the stimulation is 1 gain, 3 losses, 1 gain, 3 losses. So net, we're definitely in the valley. I like that metaphor, if I can use it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think net, it's a disaster. I'm not anti-technology, but I think you have to have some skill in being able to shut off your lower brain in order to use technology in the most creative way possible, what I would call a higher brain way. That's an excellent point. Thank you. But there's even more to the science of success. Success is a level beyond mastery. Success is how do you do in the field? How do you do in the arena? How do you do I deal with critical care situations all the time where patients are at risk for dying, and we've had some incredible saves. It's not good enough to have the skills. You also have to be able to manifest them in the moment, right? So that's another problem, which is how do you have joy in the moment, and how do you flow, and how do you adapt to the circumstances, right? Again, the dopamine system is a problem, because if you're worried about, this, now it's a problem. Oh, I want this success. And if you're like, oh, it's not happening, or you get too attached to the success, you become tunnel vision, and you get away from what I call higher brain, and I'll describe that in a second, which has a lot more functionality for greatness, creativity, focus, and awareness. We know what people who perform at a really high level of what's called alpha and beta wave synchronicity. So they're able to be focused and aware at the same time. That's a great achievement, and anybody can do this, but you've got to get self-esteem out of the way, right? But if you're attached to the outcome, you become tunnel vision and you become less powerful. And so again, Human 3.0 is we've got to change the motivation in order to perform, in order to do this genius and mastery, and to really flow well and adapt to circumstances. Okay, so this is the big idea here is how do we get this dopamine system out of the way and stay anchored somewhere else, so this system doesn't keep coming on and causing problems for us. Okay? All right. So this is the idea of lower brain, which is the craving system, nucleus accumbens, fear system, or prefrontal cortex, anxiety, amygdala, you've heard of that, stress, hypothalamus, pituitary. The alphabet soup doesn't matter. Here's the bottom line. You can only be in one place or the other. Either your oxygen and your blood is going here, or it's going here. And most people haven't caught up to this fact and the implications of being lower brain versus being higher brain. Okay, I want you to take a minute, sort of meditate on this slide and recognize that all these are neural networks. Everything is a neural network, and you get to decide where you live. But if you don't, if you're unconscious about your life, which is 99.999% of human beings, you're going lower because of the modern world. And what you just said very well, stimulate, 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 lower, 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 unless you know how to stay anchored up here. Take a minute and take a little breath to think about the implications of lower brain versus being higher brain. Oh, we cut off those ones, but they're really good.
Better focus. It's a,
No, I was trying to make their dopamine levels go down. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
So you have 2 superpowers that you are likely unaware of. One, or not taking advantage of. One is your thoughts actually control which part of the brain lights up. Your thoughts actually direct where the blood and oxygen goes. You have an unlimited capacity to keep going higher, higher, higher. That's amazing, especially when you see what the implications are of shutting that off and turning this on. And neuroplasticity, which is behind that little bar, we also talked about, which is the ability to expand and shrink your brain in an unlimited way. And so there's nothing more fascinating than expanding this and shrinking that, and then teaching this to other people. And then once you stay more anchored in the higher brain, you can cycle faster at growing and learning and connecting. And so then you can unleash the science of mastery and excellence and the science of success and greatness, which to me, greatness is above genius. So the premise with this system is brain hacks to shut that off and brain hacks to boost this. Okay, and that's coming up. I'll share the construct finally, and then we can ask any questions that we have. Questions about this? A lot of stuff coming at you, I realize. So it can be a little bit anxiety producing, but we can always get together again and talk more because I live 4 blocks away. So it's easy for me to come here. Okay, so the idea is that we're going to target different parts of the brain to shut off the lower brain, stay anchored in the higher brain, and then be really good at leadership and communication and relationships and being able to have difficult conversations while keeping both of us higher brain. How do we get motivated to elevate each other? And how do we develop skill in having difficult conversations, especially again in the athletic arena? You're moving fast. You have to be able to give feedback to each other and context and information and data and ideas. If you don't do it well, it's very triggering for the other person. They go lower brain. They feel offended. They feel judged. They feel stupid, right? So if you're not really skilled and first of all, motivated to empower everybody around you, you're going to go trigger, 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 and everyone's going to start going lower brain, tunnel vision, and there you go. You lost all that higher brain superpower. Right, so that's the third. So these are 3 big categories of brain hacks, and the brain science piece we can come back to. But more importantly, the construct here is we need to teach you to shut off your lower brain. There's 3 or 4 brain hacks for that. Anchor in the higher brain. There's different ways to do that. I know, Chad, you're a mindfulness person, but there's an array of techniques to directly activate the higher brain, as well as ways to become creatively fearless, iterating, trying new things, seeing what works and doesn't work, which also activates the higher brain. These are the 2 big ways that you can light up the higher brain. But what happens when you push more and more in trying new things, including directly activating, including with mindfulness and meditation, guess who's waiting for you when you try to do meditation? Your lower brain. Your lower brain is waiting for you and yelling at you like, are you stupid? Like, what are you wasting so much time for? We have a to-do list a mile long and we've got better things to do. Who is this guy anyways talking about this stuff? And it's not going to work. And you're going to make us look stupid and blah, blah, blah. Lower brain is so worried about loss that it'll block you from doing this. And so you'll suddenly activate the lower brain, but you'll be ready because you've learned about the lower brain, how to identify it, how to shut it off. So that's why it's really important to be what we call courageous scientist, which is you have to overcome shame and pride and guilt to accept your flaws as a human being and going lower brain in order to actually shut it off, right? So there's a really great paradox here, which is you have to accept your lower brainness to actually step outside of it and shut it off. If you ignore it, it does damage in the background, whether you acknowledge it or not. It's going to damage your body, your brain, because the lower brain can actually disconnect the higher brain and the higher brain can shut off the lower brain. This is like an epic battle going on here. If you ignore it, lower brain is chipping away at the higher brain. And so you just ignore it, you do damage to the body, the brain, and your reputation and your relationships, because you cannot hide when you are lower brain. It's impossible. And so people see a lower brain person, they're like scary or selfish, not interested, don't trust that person, don't want to take a chance with them, don't want to be vulnerable to them, don't want to anything. So if you simply ignore the lower brain, which is what most people do, that doesn't work. So you actually have to accept it, take 2 steps back of discomfort in order to separate from it and take 4 steps forward of being separate from it and more higher brain.
Yeah, just want to say something about feedback and feedback tolerance, that when we think you're in an athletic situation and things are moving fast, as Raj said, whether it's volleyball or football or anything, there's kind of three levels of feedback tolerance. One is like, you know, hopefully athletes not like this, like not really interested. Then there's like, oh, okay, what we're striving for when we're higher brain, we're like hungry for it, we're looking for it. Like someone comes off the field, they're like, all right, what can I do better? So that mindset can be very helpful for growth, and even for the coach then to be like, wow, they're really interested. So it really brings everyone higher brain.
And Paul was a world-class triathlete too, so he knows what the sports side and so, yeah, that's a really good sort of emotional perspective. Is do you crave the bumps and bruises that come from getting feedback? It's going to be painful sometimes, right? But you start to fall in love with it because you're like, oh, I got more information about my lower brain, so now I get a twofer. I get to shut off my lower brain because I got triggered, and it's exhilarating to take on and get another piece of the puzzle, right? Because knowledge, understanding, and skills and communication ability, leadership are all neural networks. So every time I get feedback about something that didn't go well, bing, another neural network just got, another branch of the neural network just appeared. So you can completely reframe. And the human 3.0 idea is that you're motivated by growth and building and the beauty of creating better relationships, better neural networks, better understanding. You're just in love with growth and building. And I'll show you some perspective on that. And so then the third set of brain hacks and discomfort. So these are all discomfort tolerance. Can I tolerate the discomfort of being lower brain? Can I acknowledge it and be okay with it? That's courageous scientist, step one. Step two is, can I iterate faster and really stimulate the higher brain? But that's sometimes going to trigger my lower brain also. And then step three, which is the hardest to do, is can I communicate and be a higher brain leader by giving feedback, giving accountability, giving motivation, setting goals, but doing so in a way that's less likely to trigger the other person's lower brain. Or if I do trigger their lower brain, I work on not being triggered by them and support them until they can flip back from lower to higher, right? So higher brain leadership is the final stage of discomfort tolerance. These are all discomfort tolerance. Feedback tolerance is the key to being really masterful and successful in anything. Questions about this construct? Please.
Could you just say a little bit more about what you mean by tolerance? Is it integrating what's coming in? Is it something else?
That's a great question. I think it's all the above. I think part of the tolerance is you get, if you don't do as well as you expected to, dopamine drops, you get the lower brain activation. You have to learn to tolerate the negative emotions, right? And it's also the tolerance of the discomfort of stage two really is the integration, like you said, is integrating that concept or knowledge or skill, right? So it is an integration tolerance. And then it's also a stage three, which is the ability to create psychological safety in making, if you're giving me feedback, I need to ideally do a good job of rewarding you for giving me feedback instead of, oh, you don't understand. And, if I'm negative, if I go lower brain, you're going to be like, next time, I'm not so interested in giving this guy feedback. And so that's another aspect of tolerance, is the ability to take it from another person. So I think it's all three stages are tolerance of different dimensions to be able to ultimately cycle faster, grow faster, learn faster, build faster, connect faster. Other questions? We're getting, I think, near the end. Then we can talk about anything we want. So the idea, circling back to the idea of human 3.0 and motivational paradigm, just to sum up, and then I have a little video from from an athlete who saw a video from a coach. Here's a video from a young man who we're supporting to try to get onto the professional golf tour. But human 1.0 and 2.0 is where most human beings exist. If we can actually measure total happiness in different ways. We can measure gamma waves. We can measure what part of your prefrontal cortex is lit up, what part of your higher brain is lit up. We can measure different levels of neurotransmitters and hormones. Like, there's a way now, it's kind of spooky to know kind of how effective you are, how higher brain you are, how happy you are. And this is just a made up graph, but when you're driven by either passive pleasure, like you talked about, the stimulation, passive pleasure, streaming, and I do plenty of streaming of movies and TVs with my wife. It's not that I don't do any passive pleasure, but passive pleasure 1.0, active pleasure 2.0, they are both dependent on external sources of dopamine, validation or pleasure. And so every time you have an episode, a happiness episode, you get some spikes in dopamine, but sometimes you're disappointed. And sometimes you kind of get used to it, or the dopamine isn't as good as you thought it was going to be. And then your dopamine levels drop because the lower brain's angry because you didn't come through with the goods. Lower brain gives you a little early payment of dopamine, but if you don't come through, it drops your dopamine levels below the 0 point to make you feel uncomfortable. That's how the system works. Whereas if you're focused on iterating, trying new things, seeing if it works when it comes to learning, growing, building, and you're just in love with building and growing things, including you and your relationships, this isn't quite accurate because you're going to have some dopamine drops, once in a while like that because you're human. But your net, your happiness is so much more diverse because the range of neurotransmitters that you're releasing by being exhilarated, higher brain, and cycling is so far superior that paradoxically, if we put the focus not so much on the outcome, yes, we need to measure the outcome and we need to do well, right? It's important, but we don't tie our whole self-esteem to the outcome. So that's the paradox, is that if you fall in love with just growing and building, as a human being and relationships and your processes, and you don't worry as much, you see what the outcome is and you make adjustments, you're like able to cycle even faster and produce way more happiness and exhilaration. But you do have to learn how to shut off the lower brain to get to this point of cycling. That's what I mean by human 3.0. And these are all neural networks, just a far superior form of happiness. And oh, by the way, because you're not worried about the outcome, but you're measuring, constantly making adjustments, you'll actually be more successful because you can tolerate more feedback from life and metrics and coaches and all the above. So I think it's really important to change your motivational system in order to really be masterful and successful. Let me show you this video from Austin, and then I'm happy to talk about anything else.
Hey guys, my name is Austin Kondrarsky. I am down here in Dallas, Texas, getting ready for a tournament, and just want to take a couple minutes and give you guys my insight into my time working with Raj. So I played golf right down the road at Marquette University. I graduated in 2019, but started working with Raj in 2015. So my freshman year, our team was basically, I think, one of the first teams to work with Raj at the conception of the LEO program. And we saw some awesome results on the golf course, but also off the golf course with camaraderie, things like that. So Raj and I stayed in touch, grew our relationship over the next 2-3 years, and then in 2019 things really changed. I graduated from Marquette and then turned professional that summer. And that's where Raj and I's relationship really became committed. We started working together 2 or 3 times a week. We'd have weekly chats, weekly meetings, things like that. And it was at that time, coming out of college, where I played 4 years of college golf. I played sports basically my whole life growing up. Very competitive in high school, things like that, where I just became so wrapped up in outcome-based thinking. So how was I doing? Was I winning? And started comparing myself to everybody, as well as just having that feeling of needing to prove everybody wrong, right? Basically, over the next few years, Raj essentially sat me down and we began to really dive into some of these emotional things that I had going on. And what we were able to uncover is just how wrapped up I was in outcomes. And that's been the biggest thing for me. So I really had to work with Raj on changing how I looked at everything, and really using golf as a microcosm of life. So now for me, it's not about just the micro of what's going on, it's the macro and the process of becoming better, not only on the golf course, but as a human being, right? Becoming a more disciplined human, being a more loving, caring human, as well as just having a growth mindset and not focusing so much on what's going on right now, and realizing that I'm putting in the work to become better long term, and that's going to pay dividends no matter what happens in my life. So in terms of what it's done for me, he's absolutely changed my life.
And he dropped his average score from 73 to 69, which is a monstrous improvement in the last 2 years. And he's just on the edge of breaking through into the tour. And so, yeah, so I think that's, and again, I didn't tell him what to say or coach him. I just wanted him to speak from the heart, but he's a really great young man who's, you know, his ability to take on difficult conversations, his ability to get funding, his ability to adapt, his adaptability is off the charts, how he can adapt to different courses and bad outcomes. Maybe the swing's not going so well. Like golf is such an incredible test of your lower brain, and he's just flourishing as a human being, more importantly. So I think the final big concept is that paradoxically, if sports is a great way, is a great platform for knowing where you are lower brain versus higher brain. And I think we underestimate what a great platform it is for human development to become a more powerful, joyful, fulfilled human being. And I think typically athletes at this level, they put all their identity eggs in one basket. They're so worried about, they're so used to getting validated for how well they do, that when that starts to wobble, they kind of collapse psychologically. And that happens to physicians too, med students, to residency, they're used to getting validated. And that's what happened to me as a youngster in med school, is that when I started to struggle, I collapsed psychologically because I was too addicted to the dopamine of validation and pleasure. And so I think what's interesting about this as well, changing your motivation and using sports to become more powerful, and that really pays off in all areas of your life, is you take the pressure off the performance, you actually perform better because you're more joyful, like a Steph Curry or a Wayne Gretzky. You're more joyful about the process of manifesting your skills and having fun and making adjustments, right? It's a lighter way, so you're more likely to unlock that greatness side of success. You've done all the work, but that doesn't mean it's going to come onto the field. If you're really worried about the outcome, it's less likely to come out on the field. And so I think it's important sports is underestimated for how powerful it is at helping human beings become more higher brain. And I think if we let people know, no matter what, you're going to be more and more higher brain because of sports, it takes the pressure off of them. And they're actually more willing to commit time, more willing to take feedback, because their whole identity isn't wrapped up in the outcome. So that's a really critical concept I want to leave you with. And then I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Niraj, any question?
Please.
I have a question, but also just wanted to check my understanding when you were saying that in terms of hacks. So what I heard is one hack, I think, is when the lower brain is kind of in control, that there's an awareness that we're not going to try to suppress that, importantly.
Yes.
But it's a sort of like the TV's playing off to the side. I noticed it. And then the second part is the change of the story. If I go low in my time or my score, or not, it doesn't, it's not about the social appraisal or the coach approval or what other people think. It's feedback from me that might be useful for me to get better. It gives me some idea of where I stand in relation to my goals. It's kind of reframing almost.
Yeah.
I'm oversimplifying, I think, but I'm just trying to grasp some of the applications.
That's an excellent reframing. I mean, I think, because in a chat, I know you're an expert of mindfulness. By the way, I think you have a cousin, Alex Worzanowski, who I work with. So yeah, I just saw her this morning at Sinai Medical Center. So I know about you. I think it's a really profoundly important point, which is, it's the acceptance of it is critical. And I think but where mindfulness, I think, sometimes goes awry, is that if you don't understand the self-esteem system and the FOMO system, your acceptance is very low. You're not interested in seeing what's going on there. No, thank you. And I think that's where most people fail with mindfulness, and mindfulness fails unless you have the story part of it. And cognitive behavioral therapy, of course, has been very successful. So this has an aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy, but really we're trying to push and come up with more powerful narratives in order to really shift people. And one of them is this hunter-gatherer narrative of self-esteem being a questionable motivator. So I think you're right. One is to accept, and there's a paradox there, which is you have to accept your flaws in order to really have command over them. And most people can't even get there because the self-esteem narrative is in the way. So I think it's both, is accept, step out, and in the gap, what other brain hacks can we put in there? It can be a change of framing, but it can also be a meditative technique. It can be a breathing technique. It can be a visualization technique. So yes, something can go into that gap when we separate and say, oh, okay, very interesting, lower brain, you're up to no good right now. Or maybe you're up to some good, you're giving me some good information about something I need to be aware of. So lower brain's not all bad. So we use it as an intuition and a loss detector, but then we flip to higher brain and have a more panoramic view of the situation and a better ability to execute. So I think that's a really great way to summarize it. Thank you. Please.
As an athlete myself, I was wondering if you could elaborate on the process and ups and downs that athletes go through when trying to activate their higher brain, and also how long it takes to see the results that you're looking.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on your unique psychological history. And so when you try to push, how does that feel like? And there's about 7 signs of lower brain activating. It's loss of energy, it's impulsivity, it's negative emotions, it's foggy thinking, it's body signs. So having a really good sort of list of what are the signs that my lower brain is actually activating, and what's triggering it right now. And so it depends. For some people, they see this framework and boom, they're done. It's like they don't have as much trauma. Like for some of us, I had a lot of psychological trauma that resulted in these mental health challenges. So even now that I know this stuff and I function at a pretty high level in different settings, I still have a lot of vulnerabilities to being triggered. So it kind of depends on your history and what your unique lower brain, what triggers it as you push yourself more and more. And determines how quickly, but sometimes it can happen really fast, especially you would notice like within an hour of doing this, people start becoming really vulnerable because they realize, oh, it's not me that's struggling here. It's a lower brain dynamic against a higher brain dynamic. And why am I beating myself up? It doesn't make sense. The analogy I use is you go to Best Buy, get a computer, and it's glitchy. You say, I'm a bad person because my computer is not working, right? Same thing here. You program this is AI, basically. AI copied our system, keeps learning from life. And so if you had various traumatic situations that resulted in you being a little bit more self-protected and more reactive, okay, that's just what you were handed. Don't beat yourself up, accept it. And so it really depends on your history and what your lower brain vulnerabilities are. And it depends, like all neural networks, it's a function of time. The more time you put into this and see what's working and not working in terms of higher brain activation and lower brain shutdown and higher brain leadership, the more time you put in, the more feedback you get from what's working and not working, the faster you'll become higher brain dominant. It's just a numbers game. That's a fact. So thank you. Does that help with your point? Okay. Please.
Where would you suggest somebody goes who wants to learn more and maybe get into putting some of these things into practice?
Yeah, I mean, so right now we mostly work with groups of 40 to 80 people. So that's kind of what Chris McIntosh and I were talking about, potentially doing some pilots. And so if we do some pilots here, you can hop on board on the pilot, So we don't do as much individual work yet, but I think, now that we're going to finally do social media, I've been resisting it all this time. But I think as we get more and more traction, then it'll be easier for us to launch a webinar and say, whoever shows up, shows up. So right now we can't address individuals as readily, But if you have a group or an organization or an entity that wants us to come in, and we do it as a nonprofit, like I do not care about profit at all, so it's pretty inexpensive on a per person basis, once we get, minimum 30, 40 people. So that's something I can always give you a card and you can always reach out to me and we can talk about it. But it's the whole intervention is only 12 hours. It's 12 hours over, over a 3 to 6 month period, because we like to do it in 1 or 2 hour chunks. So people have time to integrate the ideas, apply them, come back with their stories or their concerns or their triggers and all of the above. And so we've been able to find a way to weave it in time-wise. The time cost is basically zero. It's 12 hours over 6 months. It's like nothing. You can weave it into the nooks and crannies of the schedule. And then the financial cost is actually pretty low compared to anything else that's out there. So yeah, I'm happy to talk.
And that time-based really works because then you're practicing in between and then you're coming back and sharing, and it's not us talking, it's you talking.
Yeah.
Because you've had time in between and you're practicing.
And we've done in-person, virtual hybrids of in-person and virtual. So we've got tons of experience of what works and doesn't work. And yeah, so I'm happy to keep the conversation going anytime. Any other questions, please?
We have a squad, we're growing coaches,
Yeah,
and we have a squad of 70 to 40, so if you're looking for a group.
yeah. Yeah, well, I have to get, we have to talk to the boss first, but
Just put
I know you're a boss too, but
I'm not yet.
yeah.
Question is, how do medications factor into this process?
Yeah, I think that medications have some place in terms of lower brain, there's so much anxiety and depression right now. It's just
ADHD.
all the above. So I think it has a place, but I think we shouldn't, being a physician, I think we are a one-trick pony who's trying to always give medications because our reimbursement model doesn't reward a holistic approach to people. I think you have infinite potential to become higher brain, and I was ridiculously ADD for most of my life. And so if I can become really focused and aware in critical care situations, anybody can do it. So I really do believe in the infinite potential to go higher, and a lot of these problems start to melt away. I don't think you should abandon your medications because there is a price of suddenly stopping them and withdrawing is a problem. And it's fine as a bridge. It's part of an overall package. So, and I think it's important to not have any shame about that and say, hey, this is my lower brain. It's a little bit more active. Let me cool it down so I can let the higher brain take off. And then this may naturally sort of peel away, not needed as much.
So it'll still be effective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think medications still have a place for sure.
Yeah, and I'd love to answer your question on the athlete. I know we're at time, so if anyone wants to stick around, I can share. As from a triathlete perspective, I met Raj in 2018, and 3 or 4 months later qualified for my 3rd world championship, and it really helped. But I don't, I know we're at time.
And I'm happy to stick around for a
Yeah,
couple more minutes, but anyone needs to leave, you're welcome to take off.
Yeah.
I don't have to last hour here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Maria,